Welcome to Taiwan Report News Brief, news analysis and context from Taichung, Taiwan. I'm Donovan Smith. All right, this is a big show on big moves in the US-Taiwan relationship in the last week. Up first, US talks ending strategic ambiguity and declassified documents. A memorial message to Taiwan and China. A state official speech clarifies the direction of US-Taiwan ties. Trade talks with the US are set to begin as the US, EU, Japan, and Taiwan call for cooperation in rebuilding global supply chains. The next show will catch you up on the visit by the Czech delegation, which was very consequential. The U.S. has been rapidly adding to the number of ways it supports Taiwan, but doing so in a piecemeal way that makes it hard for China to respond to. For example, AIT this week posted up pictures of Taiwanese F-16s practicing in-flight refueling in the U.S. This is important as it shows the militaries are cooperating and learning how to operate together in a battle situation, as Taiwan doesn't have in-flight refueling capabilities, but the U.S. does. That's a clear message to China. So was the video posted a couple of months ago showing U.S. Marines training with Taiwanese in Taiwan. Also, the Taiwan News reported that for the first time ever, uniformed Taiwanese military officers visited AIT. This week, the U.S. declassified some key documents related to Taiwan. Here is what the statement by AIT says about it. The first declassified cable below, sent on July 10, 1982, from then U.S. Undersecretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger to then AIT Director James Lilly, provides the U.S. interpretation of the 1982 communique as it relates to ongoing U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. The cable explains that the U.S. willingness to reduce its arms sales to Taiwan is conditioned upon the continued commitment of the PRC to a peaceful solution of cross-strait differences. Further, if the PRC were to become more hostile, then the United States would increase arms sales to Taiwan. The directive indicates that the United States' chief concern was maintaining peace across the Taiwan Strait, and thus the quantity and quality of arms provided to Taiwan would be conditioned entirely on the threat posed by the PRC. The memo ends by offering this final assurance: U.S. arms sales to Taiwan will continue. These same ideas are echoed in an internal presidential memo drafted by President Ronald Reagan on August 17, 1982, which serves as guidelines for U.S. interpretation of the 1982 communique. The second cable, sent on August 17, 1982, from then U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz to then AIT Director Lilly, offers 6 assurances to Taiwan, reinforcing the message above. First, the United States has set no date for ending arms sales to Taiwan. Second, the United States has not agreed to prior consultation with Beijing on arms sales to Taiwan. Third, the United States has not agreed to any mediation role between Beijing and Taipei. Fourth, the United States has not agreed to revise the Taiwan Relations Act. Fifth, the United States has not agreed to take any position regarding sovereignty over Taiwan. And sixth, the United States will never pressure Taiwan to negotiate with Beijing. Now, the contents of these documents have been described as an open secret, and the Chinese have been aware of them for quite some time. That's not why this is huge news. It's the reason why they were released that is the bombshell. They're a warning to the Chinese communists. There are 2 lines that jump right out. First, quantity and quality of arms provided to Taiwan would be conditioned entirely on the threat posed by the PRC. That's clearly a warning. The second isn't new and was U.S. policy in the 1950s and 60s, went dormant in the Nixon years when he reportedly privately told the Chinese he considered Taiwan to be part of China, but returned under Reagan, that the U.S. does not take a position regarding sovereignty over Taiwan. The U.S. position is that Taiwan's status is undetermined following the Treaty of San Francisco, which went into effect in 1952. In it, The Japanese renounced their claim to Taiwan, but there was nothing in the treaty about who they were renouncing Taiwan's sovereignty to. That's not new news to China, of course, but this is a forceful reminder that it has guided U.S. policy behind the scenes. But what about the U.S. One China policy, you may ask? The U.S. policy, and many other major nations' policies are similar, merely acknowledges that China claims Taiwan, not that it is part of China. But the real bombshell is what was reported in the Financial Times. Quote, two U.S. officials told the Financial Times that there were discussions within the administration on the future of strategic ambiguity, Washington's traditional policy of not making clear how far it would go in helping Taiwan defend itself. People briefed on the discussions said the U.S. would emphasize more clearly its commitments to Taiwan and the country's significance for U.S. interests, but would steer clear of moves that could be construed by Beijing as a pretext for attack on Taiwan. One of the people briefed on the discussions said Washington would highlight its belief that Beijing, by stepping up its military threats against Taiwan, was violating its pledges to seek a peaceful resolution of the issue. Now, the end of strategic ambiguity would be huge. At one time, it made some sense. The idea was that by not committing, it both created uncertainty in Beijing and restrained the Taiwanese side from doing anything rash. That made sense in the 1950s, but not today. Taiwan is a free, open society now and wants nothing to do with China other than get along peacefully with its neighbor. China, on the other hand, has been rapidly escalating the situation. The concern now is that China may conclude the U.S. won't come to Taiwan's aid and launch an invasion, confident in that assumption. Removing the ambiguity would act as a deterrent and would also strengthen the motivation for allies, such as Japan, to also join in. Speaking on the declassification of the documents, by the way, President Tsai said that it clarified the U.S. security commitment to Taiwan. Those were not the only messages sent to Taiwan and China by AIT, though this message was far more for Taiwan. AIT last week hosted a commemorative ceremony to unveil a memorial in its new Nehu compound in Taipei to honor the 126 U.S. service members who lost their lives defending Taiwan since 1949. The memorial includes medals and two framed certificates of the Republic of China commemorative medals of the operations of defending Taiwan, conferred posthumously on Lieutenant Colonel Alfred Medendorp and Lieutenant Colonel Frank Lin in February 2016 by former President Ma Ying-jeou. This memorial is a clear message of solidarity with Taiwan, reminding everyone that American blood has been shed in Taiwan's defense. At its peak, the U.S. military presence in Taiwan reached 30,000 personnel stationed here. AIT Director Brent Christensen at the ceremony reiterated his priorities for his tenure as AIT Director, which are promoting U.S.-Taiwan security cooperation, promoting U.S.-Taiwan economic and commercial ties, promoting Taiwan's participation in the international community, and promoting U.S.-Taiwan people-to-people ties. He said the progress on security cooperation is particularly noteworthy. Christensen also said something very profoundly true. Quote, when we discuss our security relationship with Taiwan, we tend to focus on arms sales, but it is the people-to-people ties that are the real foundation of our security relationship. He's right. Everything flows from those people-to-people ties, including arms sales. Taiwan has done a good job recently making key friends around the world, especially in Washington. A group of friends of Taiwan have been promoting Taiwan's cause in Congress, while Mike Pompeo and others have championed Taiwan's cause from the executive branch. President Tsai is clearly aware of this, and so is Foreign Minister Joseph Wu. In a speech to the Heritage Foundation, David R. Stilwell, U.S. Assistant Secretary, Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs, has clarified the direction of American diplomatic relations with Taiwan and why. He starts a speech with a lot of praise for Taiwan, with lines like, "It is for these reasons that we Americans focus so much on Taiwan and why we admire its leaders and its people and its institutions and its symbolism in world affairs." A lot of ands there. However, he avoided referring to Taiwan as a country and had some annoying lines like this, quote, "For such mainland visitors, a visit to Taiwan was a reminder that no one person, no one party can monopolize the minds and thoughts of all ethnic Chinese people." He then moved on to a description of all the recent advances and breakthroughs in US-Taiwan relations. He then starts the next section with these lines. "Given these various actions, you may wonder whether the United States is trying to signal a policy change. The truth is, what I have just outlined is entirely consistent with our longstanding policy." He then explains what that long-standing policy is, the Taiwan Relations Acts, the various agreements, communiques, etc., with China and Taiwan over the years. He then says, "We have changed nothing about these long-standing policies. What we are doing, though, is making some important updates to our engagement with Taiwan to better reflect these policies and respond to changing circumstances. The adjustments are significant, but still well within the boundaries of our One China policy. We feel compelled to make these adjustments for two reasons. First, because of the increasing threat posed by Beijing to peace and stability in the region, which is a vital interest of the United States. In recent years, the Chinese Communist Party has targeted Taiwan with diplomatic isolation, bellicose military threats and actions, cyber hacks, economic pressure, United Front interference activities, you name it. These actions challenge the peace and stability of the Western Pacific. Let's be clear, these destabilizing actions come from Beijing, not Taipei or Washington. We support the longtime status quo across the Taiwan Strait. Beijing has unilaterally altered it through flipping of diplomatic partners, pushing Taiwan out of international organizations, stepped up military maneuvers, and other activities. So we must restore balance. Other peace-loving countries should do the same. Okay, this is very good. It shows that the State Department is very clear-eyed about the situation, unlike in the past. In the past, the Chinese Communist Party's actions were ignored, and Taipei was stuck having to live with it. Now, the U.S. side is clear on what China is up to. He continues further down. The second reason we have been focusing on our engagement with Taiwan is simply to reflect the growing and deepening ties of friendship, trade, and productivity between the United States and Taiwan. While they may be interrelated, our relationship with Taiwan is not a subset of our bilateral relationship with the PRC. Our friendship and cooperation with Taiwan stands on its own, fed from the wellsprings of shared values, cultural affinity, and commercial and economic ties. Now, I got the chills down my spine when I read this. For decades, Taiwan has been viewed through the prism of China, encouraged to do so not just by China, but also the KMT. Both share a vision of a so-called unified China, and both view Taiwan as a part of that. Of course, the majority of Taiwanese don't see it at all that way. So it's good to see the U.S. has finally thrown off those shackles, at least somewhat, and is seeing Taiwan for what it is, Taiwan. Unfortunately, though, he did call Taiwan a Chinese society and used the term mainland, so they're not all the way there yet. Sigh. Still, it is progress. Now that President Tsai has dropped Taiwan opposition to importing U.S. pork and expanding the types of beef allowed in, the U.S. side has reciprocated by announcing that trade talks will be taking place. The newly announced economic and commercial dialogue between Taiwan and the United States will be held by the end of this year, with September or October being the earliest. Topics to be discussed will include semiconductors and 5G, as well as strategies in the Indo-Pacific region and supply chain restructuring. The two sides are still discussing when and how to launch the dialogue. The dialogue will be launched before formal talks are held under the existing bilateral trade and investment framework, and the last time such talks took place was in October 2016. The Department of State's Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy, and Environment, Keith Kroc, or Crotch, I don't know, will head the dialogue, according to the statement. Notice, by the way, that this is taking place under the auspices of the State Department, not the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, which is usually in charge of trade talks. This is likely because the U.S. Trade Representative, is in negotiations with China and doesn't want this to interfere. In related news, officials from the U.S., EU, Japan, and Taiwan have been calling for cooperation in rebuilding global supply chains after the U.S.-China trade war and the pandemic exposed the risks of relying on China. Speaking at a conference in Taipei on Friday, AIT Director Brent Christensen urged democracies with shared values to build more secure supply chains together elsewhere. Quote, "This is going to require a coordinated effort from all of us," he said. Mr. Christensen also added that the question of reorganizing supply chains was on the top of the list for a new economic dialogue the U.S. was initiating with Taiwan. All right, hit like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Support us on Patreon and tune into the next show on the Czech delegation visit, which was very interesting.
This has been brought to you by the Taiwan Report. For more content like this, become our patron at report.tw.
哎呦，就是那个台湾狗啦，最喜欢我的台湾狗了。